You are currently paralyzed. It is a biological necessity, a safety protocol. Your brain initiates every single night to ensure that when you start running through a forest or fighting an imaginary foe in your sleep, your physical legs don't actually kick your bedroom wall. This state is called REM atonia, and it is the standard operating procedure for the human mind during its most vivid dreaming hours. But imagine for a moment that you are standing in that dream forest. You feel the damp air. You smell the pine. And then a thought occurs to you that should be impossible within the logic of a dream. You realize that your physical body is actually lying under a duvet 3 miles away. You are fully conscious, fully logical, and fully aware that the world around you is a fabrication of your own neurons. You are awake inside a lie. This is the paradox of lucid dreaming. It is a state where the brain's most advanced executive centers wake up while the rest of the system remains firmly locked in a deep, paralyzed slumber. It's a glitch in the software of human consciousness, and for decades, science wasn't even sure it was real. But that skepticism was about to be dismantled by a single pair of moving eyes. For most of the 20th century, the scientific community dismissed lucid dreaming as an oxymoron. They argued that you were either awake or you were asleep. You couldn't be both. They suggested that what people called lucid dreams were actually just brief moments of wakefulness, or perhaps just a specific type of dream about dreaming. The turning point didn't come from a theoretical argument, but from a realization about the limits of paralysis. While REM atonia shuts down nearly every voluntary muscle in the body to prevent us from sleepwalking into danger, it leaves 2 specific systems untouched: the diaphragm, so you can breathe, and the extraocular muscles, which control your eyes. In 1975, at the University of Hull, a psychologist named Keith Hearn realized that if a dreamer became conscious, they could use their eyes like a telegraph key to send a message to the outside world. He hooked up a subject named Alan Worsley to an electrooculograph and waited. Worsley had agreed that if he became lucid, he would move his eyes in a specific rhythmic pattern that never occurs naturally during sleep. In the middle of the night, while Worsley's brainwaves showed the unmistakable jagged pattern of REM sleep, the needles on the chart moved. Left, right, left, right. It was the first time in history a human had communicated from another dimension of consciousness. The wall between worlds had developed a crack. Once the eye signaling technique proved that lucidity was a measurable physical event, the race was on to figure out what was actually happening inside the skull. If the brain is supposed to be off during sleep, how does it suddenly find the power to think logically? To understand this, we have to look at the tug-of-war between 2 specific regions of the brain. In a normal dream, your limbic system, the seat of emotion and memory, is running at full throttle. This is why dreams are so vivid and terrifyingly emotional. However, your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logical reasoning and self-reflection, is almost completely powered down. This is why you don't question it when a giant talking cat asks you for directions. You lack the logic hardware to realize anything is wrong. But during a lucid dream, something unprecedented happens. A 2012 study led by Martin Dressler at the Max Planck Institute used fMRI scans to catch this moment in real time. He found that when a person becomes lucid, the prefrontal cortex suddenly flickers back to life. It's as if a room in a dark house suddenly had its lights thrown on while the rest of the building remained in total shadow. This creates a hybrid state that shouldn't exist. Dressler's research showed that the brain in a lucid dream isn't just dreaming better. It is operating in a unique physiological state that sits exactly halfway between REM sleep and wakefulness. The scans showed heightened activity in the precuneus and the frontopolar cortex, areas associated with self-assessment and metacognition, or thinking about your own thoughts. Essentially, the brain manages to maintain the intense sensory generation of a dream while simultaneously re-engaging the part of the brain that says, "Wait, this is me, I am here." This discovery was massive because it suggested that consciousness isn't an all-or-nothing switch. It's more like a dimmer. Lucid dreaming is the moment the dimmer is pushed just high enough for the observer to notice the room, but not high enough to end the movie. But there was a catch. If you push the dimmer too high, the whole system collapses and you wake up. This is why many beginners find that the moment they realize they are dreaming, the dream begins to dissolve or white out. The brain is struggling to balance 2 opposing neurochemical states, and the logical mind is often too heavy for the fragile dream environment to support. The balance was delicate, and soon, researchers thought they found the electrical signature of that balance. In the mid-2000s, the focus shifted from where the activity was happening to how the neurons were firing.
Researchers, most notably Ursula Voss from Goethe University, began looking at gamma waves.
In the world of neuroscience, gamma waves are the high-frequency rhythms associated with the highest levels of human cognition, problem-solving, intense focus, and the binding of different senses into a single conscious experience. Voss reported that during lucid dreams, the frontal lobes showed a significant spike in activity at the 40 Hz frequency. This was revolutionary. It suggested that lucidity was literally the sound of the brain tuning into a higher frequency of consciousness. In 2014, Voss took it a step further by applying a weak electrical current, transcranial alternating current stimulation to the scalps of non-lucid dreamers at that same 40 Hz frequency. She reported that she could actually induce lucidity in people who had never experienced it before. It was framed as the ultimate discovery, a God switch for the mind that could be flipped from the outside. But the God switch might have been an illusion. Science is a process of brutal self-correction, and the gamma wave theory was about to hit a massive wall of scrutiny. Other researchers began to point out a glaring problem with the original data. Remember those moving eyes that Keith Hearn used to prove lucidity existed? It turns out that when you move your eyes rapidly, it creates a specific type of electrical interference on an EEG called a saccadic potential. When the data from the gamma wave studies was re-examined, several teams found that the high-frequency brain waves might actually just have been the electrical noise created by the dreamer's eyes flicking back and forth to signal their lucidity. A more recent study published in the Journal of Neuroscience suggested that once you account for this eye movement noise, the 40 Hz consciousness spike almost entirely disappears. This doesn't mean lucid dreaming isn't real, but it means that we don't have a simple push-button explanation for it yet. The switch isn't a single frequency, it's a much more complex neurochemical dance, involving a specific neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. The brain was hiding its secrets behind a curtain of chemical signals. Acetylcholine is the fuel of REM sleep. It is the chemical that triggers the vivid imagery and the paralysis that defines our nights. Researchers have found that if you increase the levels of acetylcholine in the brain using substances like galantamine, a drug typically used to treat Alzheimer's, the frequency of lucid dreaming skyrockets. This happens because acetylcholine doesn't just fuel dreams, it also promotes a specific type of alertness within the dream state. In a 2018 study by the Lucidity Institute, participants who took galantamine reported a 42% increase in lucid dreaming compared to a placebo group. This suggests that the secret to waking up in your dreams isn't just about thinking the right thoughts, but about reaching a specific chemical threshold where the prefrontal cortex has enough fuel to stay active despite the brain's natural desire to keep it dormant. It's a literal chemical bridge between two states of being. But even with the right chemicals, why does the brain allow this to happen at all? From an evolutionary perspective, lucid dreaming seems like a massive risk. If you are conscious, you are using more energy. You might accidentally break your paralysis. You might fail to get the deep, restorative rest your body needs. The glitch began to look more like a feature than a bug. There is a theory in evolutionary psychology called the threat simulation theory, which suggests that we dream specifically to practice for dangerous situations in a safe environment. If you dream about being chased by a predator, you are essentially training your nervous system for the real thing. Some researchers believe that lucid dreaming is the pro version of this training. By becoming conscious within the simulation, you aren't just a passive observer of the threat. You can actively experiment with different ways to solve the problem. You can fly, you can transform the predator, or you can simply stand your ground. This suggests that lucidity might be a rare, higher-order survival mechanism, a way for the human mind to take total control over its own internal training simulations. It's a peak performance state for the brain, but if that's the case, why isn't it the default? Why do we spend 99% of our lives being fooled by our own minds every night? The answer likely lies in the sheer cognitive load required to maintain the state. Being lucid is exhausting for the brain, and nature rarely keeps a high-energy system running unless it's absolutely necessary for survival. This leads us to the most practical question of all. Can you actually learn to do this, or are some people just born with leaky brains? Research by Benjamin Baird at the University of Wisconsin-Madison suggests that frequent lucid dreamers actually have different brain structures than the rest of us. Using fMRI, Baird found that people who naturally lucid dream have higher resting state connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the regions of the brain that process internal signals. Essentially, their brains are wired to be more self-aware at all times, even when they aren't trying. Their internal check-in system is always running. However, this doesn't mean it's an exclusive club. Stephen LaBerge, a pioneer in the field at Stanford, proved that lucidity is a skill that can be trained through a technique called mild or mnemonic induction of lucid dreams. It involves a combination of reality testing, constantly checking if you're dreaming during the day, and prospective memory, which is the ability to remember to do a specific action in the future. By training your brain to ask, "Am I dreaming?" While you're awake, you eventually trigger that same logical habit while you're asleep. When the habit triggers during a dream, the prefrontal cortex receives the kick it needs to wake up. It's a deliberate hijacking of the brain's habit-forming circuitry. But even with the best training, the experience remains elusive for many. This is because the brain has multiple fail-safes to prevent lucidity. One of the most common is the false awakening. You might realize you're dreaming, and your brain responds by waking you up into a second dream. You find yourself in your bedroom, you get out of bed, and you start your day totally convinced you are now awake. It is a masterful piece of deception, a way for the subconscious mind to satisfy your desire for lucidity without actually giving you control of the cockpit. These nested layers of dreaming show just how committed the brain is to maintaining the illusion of reality. It doesn't want you to know you're in the simulation. It wants you to take the threats and the emotions seriously because that's how the training works. When you become lucid, you are essentially breaking the immersion of the most sophisticated virtual reality system in the known universe. The system doesn't like to be broken. The biological reality of lucid dreaming is a messy, beautiful collision of opposing forces. It is the limbic system's fire meeting the prefrontal cortex's ice. It is a state where the laws of physics are replaced by the laws of expectation. In a lucid dream, if you expect to be able to walk through a wall, your brain's visual and tactile centers will coordinate to simulate the sensation of matter passing through matter. If you doubt yourself, the wall will remain solid. This is because, in this hybrid state, your beliefs act as the source code for the reality you are experiencing. There is no external data to contradict you. There is only the internal feedback loop of your own neurons. This has led some researchers to explore lucid dreaming as a tool for physical healing and skill acquisition. Because the brain cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined action and a real one, athletes have used lucid dreaming to practice complex movements in their sleep. Studies have shown that practicing a motor skill in a lucid dream can actually lead to measurable improvements in that skill in the waking world. You are literally rewiring your brain while you sleep. But we have to return to the original paradox. If the brain is paralyzed and the eyes are the only way out, then the lucid dreamer is a prisoner who has found a way to look through the bars. We are back to that first moment in 1975, with Alan Worsley's eyes moving under his lids. That experiment didn't just prove a point about sleep. It proved something fundamental about the nature of the human self. It showed that you, the conscious, thinking, logical observer, are not synonymous with your brain. Your brain can be in a state of total unthinking chaos, lost in a dream of talking cats and falling teeth, while you remain tucked away in a corner of the prefrontal cortex, waiting for a chance to take the wheel. It reveals that consciousness is a guest in the house of the brain, not the owner. Most nights, the house runs itself, and the guest is sedated. But occasionally the guest wakes up early and realizes they have the keys to the entire mansion, and that is when the real danger starts to flicker at the edges. There is a phenomenon known as sleep paralysis that often accompanies the transition into or out of a lucid dream. This occurs when the waking part of your brain and the paralysis part of your brain get out of sync. You wake up, your eyes open, and you can see your bedroom, but the REM mitonia hasn't been switched off yet. You are pinned to the bed, unable to move a finger, while your brain, still halfway in a dream state, begins to project dream imagery into the real world. This is the origin of the shadow person or the hag sitting on the chest that has been reported across every culture for thousands of years. It is a literal collision of worlds, a moment where the glitch of lucidity becomes a waking nightmare. It reminds us that the wall between being awake and being asleep isn't a brick wall. It's a thin, permeable membrane. And sometimes, things from the other side crawl through. The research continues, but the mystery only deepens with every scan. In the last decade, we've moved from eye signals to fMRI to neurotransmitter manipulation, and yet we are still struggling to define exactly where reality ends and dreaming begins. If we can create a world that feels 100% real using nothing but our own internal chemistry, how can we be sure that the waking world isn't just another layer of the same process? This is the ultimate rabbit hole of lucidity research. It forces us to confront the fact that everything we see, hear, and touch is a construction of the brain. Whether you are lucid dreaming or sitting in a coffee shop, you are never experiencing the real world directly. You are only ever experiencing your brain's best guess of what the world looks like. Lucid dreaming simply shows us the man behind the curtain. It shows us the machinery of our own perception. It proves that our reality is far more fragile and far more customizable than we ever dared to imagine. The eye signals were just the beginning of the message. As we look forward, the goal isn't just to have cool dreams. Scientists are looking at using lucidity to treat chronic nightmares in PTSD patients, allowing them to face their fears from a position of power. They are looking at it as a way to explore the very nature of consciousness itself. If we can figure out how to turn on the prefrontal cortex during sleep, we might learn how to turn on other parts of the brain during the day. We are looking at a future where the 8 hours we spend asleep every night aren't just lost time, but a second life, a laboratory for the mind where we can explore the furthest reaches of human potential without the constraints of gravity or consequence. But for now, we are still in the early stages, like the first sailors looking out at an unknown ocean. We know there's something out there, but we've only just learned how to build a boat. And that boat is built of habits, chemicals, and a single recurring question. Think back to the paralyzed body we started with. It's still there, lying in the dark. The neurons are still firing in the visual cortex, creating a world of impossible colors and shapes. The amygdala is still pulsing with ancient fears. But somewhere right behind your forehead, a few cells have decided to stop playing along. They have decided to remember. And in that moment of remembering, the forest becomes more than a dream. It becomes a choice. You realize that you aren't the person running through the forest. You are the forest. You are the sky above it. You are the very air that the dreamer is breathing. The observer has become the creator. But don't get too comfortable. The dimmer switch is already starting to slide. The light is getting too bright. The logic is getting too heavy. And the house is getting ready to evict its guest. The simulation is about to end. We spent centuries thinking that sleep was a blank space, a period of non-existence that we simply endured between days. We were wrong. Sleep is a dense, high-speed processing state that is just as complex and perhaps more mysterious than anything we do while we're awake. Lucid dreaming is the bridge that allows us to walk across that gap and see the work as it's being done. It's the only time we get to see the brain's source code while it's still running. And while the science of eye signals and 40 Hz waves gives us the how, the why remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in all of biology. Why did nature give us the ability to wake up inside our own heads? Maybe it was for survival, maybe it was for practice, or maybe it was just a side effect of having a brain that is simply too powerful for its own good. It took a polygraph and a rhythmic eye movement in 1975 to prove that we could be conscious while we sleep, but it might take another 100 years to understand what that consciousness actually is. Until then, we are left with the techniques of Laberge and the chemicals of the modern lab, trying to catch a glimpse of the light in the window. We are trying to find that perfect balance, that sweet spot where we can stand in the middle of a fabrication and feel the weight of our own existence. It is the ultimate human adventure, a journey to a place that doesn't exist on any map, but is closer to us than our own skin. It is the discovery that even when we are most vulnerable, even when we are paralyzed and blind to the world, there is a part of us that never truly sleeps. So, the next time you find yourself in a world that doesn't quite make sense, don't just keep running. Stop. Look at your hands. Count your fingers. Ask the question. Because somewhere, deep in the machinery of your night, a light is waiting to be turned on. And once you see the room for what it really is, you can never go back to being just a character in someone else's story. You have the keys now. The mansion is yours. The only thing left to do is decide what you're going to build before the sun comes up and the paralysis breaks. You aren't just a passenger in your own mind, you are the pilot. And the only reason you haven't taken control yet is because you're still convinced the ground beneath you is solid. It isn't. You are dreaming right now. There is no debate, no second opinion, and no escape from the fact that your entire reality is a beautifully rendered hallucination that you have mistaken for the truth. If you found this exploration of the mind's hidden architecture fascinating, there are many more rabbit holes like this to explore. I'd love to hear about your own experiences in the comments. Have you ever managed to take the wheel, or did the dream dissolve the moment you tried? Feel free to subscribe if you want to keep diving into the strange science of being human. We're only just getting started. Your brain is a masterpiece of deception, but today you've at least learned how to spot the cracks in the paint. Go back to sleep if you can, but this time try to remember that the walls aren't real.